Arthur was a young man who valued simple moments of silence and freedom more than anything else. Every morning, he put on an old windbreaker, called Bruno, his golden retriever, and they went for a walk along a familiar path that stretched across a vast field. A clear day caressed their faces with sunlight. The wind gently moved the tops of the grasses, and the stalks crunched quietly under their feet. Bruno always ran ahead, as if he were making a path, occasionally glancing back at Arthur as if inviting him to go faster. He jumped, breathing in the smells, chasing butterflies. Arthur smiled. There was something genuinely alive in the dog's carefree movements. For both of them, this morning was like hundreds of others, warm, peaceful, predictable. They stopped at a low hillside where the grass was a little thicker. Arthur sat down with his legs stretched out, and Bruno lay down beside him, resting his head on his lap. The boy ran his hand over his fur, looking up at the sky. This was their ritual, a brief respite before they turned back home. There was nothing to portend trouble. Arthur was about to get up when Bruno suddenly jumped up. He barked, short, muffled, as if he'd seen something in the grass. Arthur turned around, but didn't immediately realize what was happening. Bruno rushed towards the bushes at the edge of the path, where the grass was especially thick. And the next instant, he saw something dark and slippery burst out of the grass and coil itself around the dog's body. A thick anaconda ring that instantly squeezed Bruno like a rope. It all happened too fast. The dog twitched, whimpered, and Arthur took off in a panic. It took him seconds to reach them. Bruno was pinned to the ground, the anaconda already engulfing his torso and dragging upward to his chest and neck. Arthur shouted, grabbed to the nearest dry branch, and began striking at the snake's body. He acted in panic, not thinking about what would happen next, just to save Bruno. Blow after blow. The anaconda wouldn't let go. Arthur piled his body on top of the snake's tail and pulled as hard as he could. The snake jerked sharply, loosening its grip. Bruno breathed weakly, twitching his paw. The snake, feeling threatened, began to retreat, slithering back into the grass. Arthur sank down beside Bruno, gulping for air. The dog lay there, shivering, but alive. Bruno was breathing heavily, lying on his side, his sides barely up. Arthur cautiously examined the dog's body. There were red squeeze marks on his fur, and a long scratch on his belly from snake scales. His friend could barely keep his eyes open. "Be patient, boy," Arthur whispered, lifting Bruno into his arms. He clutched the dog tightly to his chest and headed back down the path at a brisk pace. It was at least a kilometer to the car, but Arthur walked without stopping. His hands were shaking with effort, his heart was racing, but he didn't let himself panic. The main thing was not to lose Bruno. Every minute seemed like an eternity. He almost ran, cradling the dog, feeling the faint pulse beating somewhere near his neck. Finally, he reached the car, carefully placed Bruno in the back seat, started the engine, and stepped on the gas. While the dog moaned quietly in the back seat, Arthur held the steering wheel with one hand and soothed him with the other. He raced toward the nearest veterinary clinic, praying it wouldn't be too late. In the mirror, he saw Bruno's tired but lively face, and that was enough to keep him going. When Arthur ran into the veterinary clinic with Bruno in his arms, he was greeted by a team of doctors. He was almost screaming, explaining that the dog had been attacked by a snake. The medics quickly placed Bruno on a gurney and rolled him inside. Arthur remained in the hallway, staring at the closed door with clenched fists. The minutes dragged on agonizingly. He could feel the sweat running down his back, and his heart was still beating in his throat. He replayed over and over in his mind the moment of the attack, his screams, the body of the snake, Bruno's trembling paws. Finally, the door opened. A young woman in a white robe stepped out to him. "We made it. He's lost a lot of strength, but there's no serious internal injuries. We'll put in an IV, treat the abrasions, and give him some painkillers. He's in good hands." Arthur exhaled with difficulty. He was still shaking, but now it was relief. Through the glass, he could see Bruno lying half asleep on the table under the lamp. The vet was carefully tending to his wounds. Another assistant was holding his paw. The dog didn't resist. He trusted. All he could do was just breathe and wait. A few days passed. Bruno was in one of the clinic's enclosures, in a separate warm room where he was safe and secure. His body was recovering quickly. His bite marks were healing, his breathing was steady, and his eyes were shining again. Arthur came every day. He sat down next to the enclosure, stroked the dog through the bars, and spoke softly to him. Bruno, hearing his footsteps, would get up and come closer, huddling against the bars. He was still weak, but his tail was wagging slowly, a sign that he was coming back to himself inside. The doctors were already letting him out for short walks around the clinic yard. Slowly but surely, Bruno took step after step. He felt the ground beneath his paws again, the wind in his fur, and the warmth of the sun. Arthur walked beside him, supporting him when needed. Soon they would be told he could go home. Though there was still recovery ahead, the most important thing had already happened. Bruno was alive and he was not alone. Arthur sat on a bench near the veterinary clinic, and every time the door opened, he froze. Inside, they were still treating the wound, changing the bandage, and there was nothing he could do but wait. The wind carried the faint smell of antiseptic, and every honk from the street seemed too loud. He clutched the leash in his hand and mentally replayed everything that had happened over the past day. Finally, the door opened slightly. Ray appeared in the doorway, his paw still bandaged, but standing firmly on his feet. His eyes immediately found Arthur. He froze for a second, then stretched forward with a quiet whimper. Arthur stood up, not believing his eyes, and crouched down, opening his arms wide. "Come here, baby," he whispered. Ray ran up and buried his muzzle in his owner's chest. Arthur hugged him tightly, his fingers clinging to his fur as if he were afraid of losing him again. He could feel the dog breathing, lively, deeply, calmly. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. They were tears of relief. They returned home under a clear sky, along the same path across the field where it all began. But now the field was completely different. Ray walked beside him, a little slower, but with the same confidence in every step. He didn't lag behind, and his ears moved, catching Arthur's voice as he told him everything, just to talk, to fill the space. On the porch, Ray settled down at his master's feet, resting his head on his knees. Arthur stroked him, feeling every bump in his fur under his fingers. Before them lay a green sea of grass, and in it there was no danger, no pain, only peace.